The moon landing. Man's greatest achievement. Or perhaps, man's greatest sin. Hello everyone, my name is Philip, and you're watching Philip-osophy. Today, we'll be talking about a rather controversial topic, the moon landing. We can all agree that the moon landing was cool, but was it ethically cool? Philosophers have been debating this question for centuries, even before Lance Armstrong's girthy feet collided with the ever-so-chalky soil of the lunar surface. Surprisingly, this discussion began not with a philosopher, but with a chemist, Galileo. Yes, the very same Galileo who wrote Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. In 1522, Galileo was sent by the Swiss monarch King Magillicarchi on an expedition to conduct research in the recently discovered Pacific Ocean. Starting in Swiss waters, he set sail aboard 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Titanic. After getting a bit lost, 2/3 of Galileo's fleet made it to their destination, the McBuckley Islands, which were later renamed in honor of Galileo to the Galapagos Islands. There were a bunch of weird finches here that Galileo was supposed to study, but instead, he decided to study the moon, which he could have done just as well from literally anywhere else on the planet. His telescope fixed on the sky, Galileo pondered a very important question. What if we could stand on the moon? And what if doing so was actually really unethical? On a whim, he decided that both propositions were true and departed the islands immediately. When Galileo finally got home, he formed the Anti-Lunar Lads, a reactionary political party dedicated to protesting a problem he made up. The Anti-Lunar Lads, along with a coalition of round-Earth conspiracy theorists, would stand outside the Vatican and endlessly chant, "Moony, moony in the sky, if we land there we could die. Let's make sure we never try, if we ever learn to fly." It should be noted that Galileo never actually elaborated on his reasons for being so against landing on the moon. Thankfully, there were a handful of rogue philosophers who were eager to do it for him. The first was, of course, Spinoza, who argued that we should steer clear of the moon so that we don't awaken the Lovecraftian lunar god Apocalypse. Francis Bacon, the philosopher king of Western Monaco, disputed his claim, writing, "You idiot! Apocalypse isn't real! The moon is inhabited by the moon beasts, who make their home in the lunar city of unknown Kadath, which is the real reason we shouldn't go to the moon." Spinoza was furious and quit philosophy, becoming the world's first Disney Imagineer. He single-handedly designed Space Mountain, but Galileo's rabid followers thought the ride was a real spaceship launching facility and razed it to the ground. Thomas Crunch King Hobbes, in between bites of his favorite snack, baked barbecue Lay's potato chips, argued, "Going to the moon is actually a good thing. As there may be wonderfully scrumptious delicacies there, hidden by a delightful fey being, like Lucky the Leprechaun from the Lucky Charms breakfast cereal." Hobbes, unfortunately, was proven wrong 300 years later when the Armstrong twins landed on the moon and only encountered Toucan Sam and the Trix Rabbit. Snap and Crackle were also there, but their brother Pop, known in the American South as Soda, appeared to have died under mysterious circumstances. But anyways, fast forward 100 years and the moon debate saw a dramatic shift. Picture this, the year is 1622. England's War of the 15 Kings has just begun. Philosophers are rounded up like cattle and locked in the murky dungeons of Count Regalio, the philosophy-hating pretender king. For 11 years, all these brilliant minds had but a single connection to the outside world, a small window located high up on the back wall of their incredibly cramped cell. Every night, they would look outside and see the moon, and that really got them talking. The imprisoned philosophers made tier lists of their favorite craters. They debated endlessly why the moon's third quadrant was better than the second, and it's rumored that Francis Bacon beat Blaise Pascal within an inch of his life for foolishly saying he liked the waxing crescent phase more than the waning gibbous. Science, of course, has since proven that the waning gibbous phase is superior, but that's beside the point. What matters here is that Count Regalio was unwittingly hosting a sort of philosophy convention in his dungeons, one that started an entire pro-lunar landing philosophical movement, the Lunatics. Part 5. Revolution. Once Count Regalio passed away and his philosophy-loving heir, Count Regalio Jr., set the lunatics free, they spread their ideology around Europe. They decreed, "We must land on the moon, no matter the cost." Obviously, they were fiercely opposed to the anti-lunar lads, and the two movements regularly engaged in guerrilla warfare against each other. The novelist Edmund Burke, fresh off of writing his magnum opus, Little Women, Big Problems, was eager to mix things up and deal with big men and completely inconsequential problems for a change. As such, he became an outspoken anti-lunar activist. Burke, in a persuasive essay littered with ad hominems, published a famous quote that has since become synonymous with the anti-lunar movement. "Alright, listen up, you f***s! I'm Edmund f***ing Burke! I wrote the New York Times best-selling novels, Little Women, Big Problems, and the J volume of the 2008 World Book Encyclopedia. Who cares about the moon? We should be focused on landing on the sun so that we can harvest naturally occurring sunny D. And don't even think about hitting me with that 'wouldn't we all burn to death' How many best-selling novels have you written, huh? 1? 2? Well, I've written 3, so I'm better than you!
Logical fallacy spotted.
Eagle-eyed viewers will have already noticed that Burke's argument contained a hidden logical fallacy. I'll give you a few seconds to guess which one. Did you find it? The logical fallacy Burke employed was accidentally making a typo. See? He misspelled. Burke and his fellow anti-lunar lads loved using logical fallacies because they made debate so much easier. Their favorite was the appeal to emotion. They would take the debate stage and play a VHS copy of Marley and Me, putting the audience in an emotionally compromised state where they'd be more susceptible to propaganda. Then, they employed the black and white fallacy, flickering the lights on and off until the audience was hypnotized. Finally, their audience now subdued, the anti-lunar lads would employ their most powerful logical fallacy, lying. They claimed the moon was made of cheese, or more specifically, a fragile queso fresco, which would surely crumble were humans to ever walk on it. The lunatics engaged in a similarly corrupt yet far less effective strategy called tax evasion. They clearly weren't aware of the popular aphorism, "When the feds come a-knocking, you'd better get walking," and got locked into a 5-year protracted legal struggle in which their primary defense was, "Your Honor, we didn't know we had to pay taxes." They got off with a warning, but the anti-lunar lads had taken advantage of their opponent's absence from the debate sphere and cemented themselves as the dominant moon-related philosophy. From the late 1600s to the early 1900s, the debate had become relatively stagnant. People had moved on to other hot-button topics like the color of this dress, which, for the record, was proven to have been periwinkle and beige. It wasn't until the Wright brothers, Henry and Ignacio Wright, invented the helicopter that philosophers realized they had to solve the moon problem before it was too late. After all, Volkswagen, who, as you can see from their 1940s logo, manufactured helicopter blades at the time, was already working on space-grade helicopter blades. Henry J. Volk, the company's founder, was unaware that helicopter blades wouldn't work in a low-oxygen environment such as the vacuum of space, which led to several astronauts dying. For more fun historical tidbits like that, check out my history podcast, Philistory. Jean-Paul Sartre, head of the newly reformed anti-lunar lads, led the charge against humanity's scientific ambitions. However, he faced a formidable opponent in the form of Simone de Beauvoir, the only female philosopher in history. And this time, the lunatics were no longer hindered by their prior financial shortcomings, thanks to the recent invention of TurboTax 2019. The stage was set for war. However, the philosophical battlefield was about to be changed forever thanks to the rise of a new school of thought, ambivallism. The ambivalists, much like my YouTube channel, were sworn to stalwart neutrality. The movement's founder, Ludwig Wittgenstein, laid out his arguments in his first essay, "Please just shut up about the moon already." Guys, look. I just watched that one movie where the moon gets hit in the eye with a rocket, and its face kinda freaked me out. Could you at least add like a trigger warning or something to the beginning of your philosophical treatises? XO, XO, witty vitty out. Unfortunately for Wittgenstein's post-traumatic stress disorder, the only triggers in this debate would be the allegorical triggers on the opposing side's logic guns, which now came stocked with extended magazines thanks to the invention of the electric printing press. In these magazines, the anti-lunar lads and lunatics published a variety of highly slanderous essays and political comics, such as this one depicting Sartre getting hit by a car and seeking last-minute forgiveness for his sins from a passing priest. Funnily enough, Sartre's real-life death played out very similarly, but the only nearby religious leader was a rabbi. Following the common Jewish practice of rejecting potential converts until the third meeting, the rabbi refused to grant Sartre absolution. Scientists have yet to confirm whether he earned a spot in heaven, and they blocked me on LinkedIn when I asked again. The lunar debate reached its climax in 1962 when Chattanooga Bakery Incorporated, as part of an unorthodox marketing campaign for their signature product, moon pies, lobbied the US government to go to the moon. According to the Tennessee Cookie Company CEO, Chad A. Nuga, the company hadn't considered the moral implications of landing on the moon because, quote, "We thought the debate was some kind of in-joke. I didn't realize they were being serious." Not wanting to spearhead a moral crusade, he quickly tried to do a chargeback on his credit card for all the lobbying funds, but it was too late. The government had already begun construction of the world's first rocket launch facility. The anti-lunar lads were obviously furious about this development, not only because they saw going to the moon as a moral atrocity, but because the facility was being built only a few blocks away from their HQ, and the noise would drive down property values. The Lunatics HQ was also near the launch facility, but an adjacent billboard advertising soundproof wall paneling blocked the noise from reaching them, so their property value was unaffected. To think, humanity may have never gone to the moon had the acoustic paneling company not inexplicably decided to live demo their product on the side of a billboard. Whether this was coincidence or divine providence has yet to be determined. The two movements, not ambivalent, they stayed home that day, had their final showdown in 1964 in the NASA control room. Up until this point, the anti-lunar lads had been unsuccessful in stopping the project. In fact, the rocket containing Louis Armstrong was already in orbit around the moon, ready to touch down once command gave him the go-ahead. However, NASA leadership decided for some reason to entertain the anti-lunar lads' last-ditch attempt to appeal the decision. Just in case, they had Stanley Kubrick on site to fake the landing if they deemed the real thing too unethical. The NASA control room became something more like a courtroom. The defendant? Humanity's immortal soul. This moment would later be known as the normative ethics debate heard round the world. For 3 long weeks, the planet sat with bated breath as the two movements engaged in the longest marathon debate in history. Artists and musicians everywhere created works meant to bolster support for their preferred side of the argument. Pop artist and devoted lunatic Andy Warhol painted a poorly proportioned but positive depiction of the moon to indicate his support of the project. On the other side of the debate, musician John Lennon pushed conspiracy theories about alleged corruption in the lunar project in his tell-all album, The Dark Side of the Moon. As the debate raged on and became an increasingly high-profile event, celebrities were brought on to take part in the philosophical festivities. One half of the control room joined Michael Jackson in an impromptu performance of We Are the World, meant to remind NASA leadership of where their planetary allegiance lay. Despite this, the debate seemed to be leaning heavily towards the lunatics. However, in the metaphorical 11th hour, a surprise discovery was made. It was found that Kevin Spacey, the leader of NASA and the case's de facto judge, was marketing lunar real estate on Craigslist. In other words, he couldn't possibly be impartial. The surviving 11 protagonists from the movie 12 Angry Men were brought in to serve as an impromptu jury. Larry Armstrong, still orbiting the moon, was running low on food. A decision had to be made that night. Both sides had one last chance to argue their case. The anti-lunar lads put forward their fiercest debater, a master of his craft. Oh no, not again! Alfred Camus, the worst philosopher of all time, put forward perhaps the weakest argument ever recorded. Good people of the jury, I'm Camus, and I'm a big fat idiot with a stupid face, and I have no friends, because my refutations of nihilism make me look like a nerd!
Logical fallacy spotted.
The logical fallacy that Camus committed here is an ad hominem, against himself. Camus' terrible, terrible closing arguments finished. 3 lunatics, Karl Popper, Martin Heidegger, and Bertrand Russell, took the stage. The 3 had taken an improv class together a few years prior, so they decided to utilize that shared experience to bolster their argument. They stood in the Sphinx formation and delivered their arguments one word at a time, the speaker alternating with each. Hello, jurors. 1, 2, 8, 9, West Sycamore Street. Does that sound familiar to any of you? I'm sure it sounds familiar to you, Gary. After all, that's where you live with your wife, Helen, and your 2 daughters, Patricia and Matilda, isn't it? It would be a shame if something were to happen to them. In perhaps the greatest debate moment in history, the 3 lunatics went through each of the 11 angry men, dropping subtle doubts as to their family's safety in a very similar fashion. Despite their arguments not once mentioning the moon, the jurors surprisingly found them to be incredibly convincing. They all voted in favor of the lunar landing, settling the centuries-old philosophical discussion once and for all. There are some philosophers today that still cling to the legacy of the anti-lunar lads, but the movement is mostly dead. After all, if landing on the moon is deeply immoral, then humanity's soul has already been sullied. It's too late to take it back now. Modern philosophers have set their sights on the ethics of landing on Mars, which is a subject I'll need to save for another video. Thanks for watching, everyone! Before you go, I'd really appreciate if you could like and subscribe, and make sure you ring-a-ding-ding that little bell, or else I'll be really sad.
Logical fallacy spotted.
Aw, dang it! That was an appeal to emotion!